Hello and welcome to our second tutorial on our basic game creation in Unity. So this video will be on creating a player, and we're going to go with a first person character to begin with because it's nice and simple. We don't need a model, and it just gets us the basics of um, controls, looking around, interacting with the terrain. So we're not going to reinvent the wheel on this one. We are going to be using some assets from the asset store. So make sure you got your asset tab open. If you don't, go up to Windows, General, and you should be able to find the asset store. In the asset store, we're just going to type in the top here, standard assets, and Unity has some pre-made assets. It's free, and it should work with all the versions of Unity. And you're just going to download that collection of assets. So you'll download it and import it into your project. So from there now you'll see standard assets come up in your assets list, and you get a whole bunch of different things. We're not going to go through all of them. We're just going to look at the ones we need. And we're going to go into characters, and as you can see, you've got a first person character. I've got a rollable character, which I'm not actually sure is part of the standard assets, and a third person character. So we're just going to go to the first person character, and you'll see we've got 3 folders and this just little instructional. You can have a little look at this instructional, but I'm just going to go through some of the major points of this. So we've got audio. So in the audio file, we've got some different things like footsteps. In prefabs, we have our actually pre-made characters. So this one is our one with our scripts on it, and is the one we're going to be using. And you've also just got the one here that's just a little bit simpler. And then we've got our scripts, so they're written in C#, and that's the programming language that we'll be using, so we can have a little look at those as well. So in the prefabs, we're just going to drag this prefab into our terrain and just place it. At the moment, it's just a little bit halfway through our plane, so we're just going to prop it up a bit, and this should work straight up. If we run this now, and as you can see, I'm moving my mouse around and it's auto locked the mouse to that screen down the bottom, and if I hit WASD it moves around based on that. If I hit spacebar, we can jump. So it's pretty much an instant character straight in there for first person. But we are going to muck around with it, have a little look at some of the settings as to what all these settings on the right hand side can do. And just remember, if you change any settings while you're running the game, it's not going to save those settings. So we're going to have to jump out of the game to be able to change things up. Or if you do want to muck around with the settings, you're going to have to remember them if you want to save them in later after you stop your gameplay. So hit escape to get your mouse back, and then we can just go up to the top and stop the game. Alright, so over here on the right hand side we've got this is our control character. So this is how much of a slope that it can move up, step offset, and a few other different little things. So, and we're not really going to muck around with that too much. You can change the height of your character if you want a short character, a tall character, but this is the main part. This is what we want to be editing to change things about our character. So this first person script, it uses a couple of other scripts as well, so it's linked into a few other scripts, and that's where we're going to be changing most of our settings. We're just going to look at a rigid body. Rigid body is to do with our physics. So that's how we interact with different things. And our audio source is what happens, where we get our sound from. So if we've got, in this case, it's the walk cycle, so the walking and the jumping. If we have sounds attached to them, then this produces an audible sound. Now, at the bottom down here, you might have a little error saying 2 audio listeners in the scene. Sure, there is exactly 1 audio listener in the scene. So what does that mean? We can't see an audio listener on this screen, but if we look at our little prefab here, it's got a little arrow next to it because it has an extra item on top of it, and that's the camera. And a camera has obviously our view, but then it also has an audio listener. This is the device that it figures out the distance between the audio source and the audio listener to give a perspective of distance and direction of the sound. So at the moment we've got a camera in here, but we've also still got a main camera which is just floating up in space. We don't need that camera anymore. We can just hit delete on that camera, and that camera is gone. So we've just got the one, and then that error should pop away when we run the scene again. See, it's not down the bottom there, and our sound comes through. So you can hear when I jump, you can hear those sounds. You can hear the walk cycle of me walking around. There we go. Alright, so we're going to muck around now. We'll go back to our first person controller, and we're going to muck around with a few of these different things. So walk speed, run speed. So we can change these up. We can increase these, and if we run it now, our character will move a little bit faster. Now there is a run, so if you hold down shift there is a run speed, but we've just upped our walk speed, so we can muck around with that. We can change these values. We can also have the distance of how far you're traveling. Obviously it only goes up to 1, and we can also set these manually with numbers. Jump speed, so that will indicate how high we jump. Gravity, how fast we fall back to ground. Look around, so we can affect how much our mouse makes us rotate, and that can be very sensitive, so just be careful with that one. Use head bob, so as you can see when we are moving, you can see the camera bounces up and down. We can turn that on and off. That's just a tick box there, and that's using another script to be able to run that. So we're not going to muck around with that one too much, but we can change how much the head bob is and change these concentration curves and all this sort of stuff, but we don't need to. We can turn head bobbing off, and that's just a single tick there. So first person controller, very simple. We might have a little look at the scripts. So if we open up first person, we double click on it. Hopefully when you installed Unity you got some sort of editing tool. Just drag it across here, and we've got Visual Studio. So as you can see, there's a little bit of code here, and there is a fair bit of information about what's happening. So just some key points to look at. We're going to, later on in the project, we'll be doing a bit more coding and getting into it, but we don't really need to reinvent the wheel on the character, so we're just going to use what's here. In this top section, we've just allocated some resources that we need to grab from Unity. So there's a few cross-platforms, so just in case you're doing it across different ISOs. And then getting random, so we can have random numbers and things like that. In this first section, you can see that we're setting up a lot of variables. Just got something caught in my throat. And what from here is we got some more variables down the bottom here, and these variables are setting up things like rotation, the inputs, the character controls, colliders, everything we need for our character. The start function, okay, this is a special function. This is an initialization of our character that runs once and runs right at the beginning of the program. So this is just setting up all these different things, aligning things to different things. Getting the camera in the right spot, attaching it to the camera, getting its local position, that sort of thing. When we're in our update, so this is where this runs every frame, and it is basically where we can say what are we doing. So are we jumping? Then it looks at doing the jumping commands. Is our player on the ground? That sort of stuff. We got a little variable function here that allows us to play some sound, and that gets used, as you can see up here, when we like land on the ground and that sort of thing. Fixed update is more to do with our physics, so moving our object around and getting to interact with different objects. So a fixed update and update are two completely different things, and it is again run every single frame, but is more to do with you have your character controls in here. So as you can see, you got some physics tags and things like that that control what our character is doing in terms of its movement. You can also see here it's got some effects of gravity and things like that, and our controls on them. Um, and of course, looking around, so our mouse look. We've got some more um, things here, so um, jumping, jump sounds, and then we've got a few other functions that just break down our project to make it a little bit easier. And most of these are named pretty well, so you can tell what they are. Update camera position, obviously it moves the camera around, the rotation on the camera, getting inputs, so you know your left, right, WSD, that sort of controls, and you know inputs for your shift to run. So this file we're not really going to touch too much because it's got enough variables in Unity itself that we have a lot of control over what happens to our character. And the best thing you can do is, if we just jump back to Unity, um, is to play around with those settings, muck around with things. Just remember, if you do break it, you can delete this character really easily just by hitting delete. Oops, I had it on rename, and just delete. There we go, don't have a camera in the scene anymore. And we can just drag the prefab back across, and there you go, it's reset to what it was originally. Um, and you can play around with it again. So that's going to be it for this tutorial. It's a nice short one about the character, and hopefully you get a little character running around. You might find that there's some physics things, like if I run around I can fall off the edge and climb back up and things like that, but we will be fixing that later on. So at the moment there's this giant hill here, but apparently you can actually scale it sometimes if you're jumping constantly. Oh, no, found a spot we can't. Oh. So if anyone's ever played Skyrim, you can climb mountains. It's probably the reason they can do it. And as you can see, when you jump down, you're not dying or anything like that from damage from falling. And if we go over the ocean, you can jump straight through the ocean. There's no collider there. There's no, oh, I'm going to die when I hit the water or something like that. We splat and see, you can see the terrain underneath the ocean. So there's some things that need to be worked on in this project, but we're just getting a nice start on our character. Alright, I'm going to leave it there for this tutorial. In the next tutorial we might have a little look at some of these problems, and then we might start getting some other assets into our project. Thanks for listening.